Let's get to it. Let's do it. Ready?
There, on underneath. Yes, I'm ready.
All right. Welcome to the first episode of this podcast that I've been wanting to do for years. My name is Calvin Corelli. With me today, I have Beth Bard-Jobson, who is my chief of staff. We've been working together for 6 years or something. And throughout the years, we've had a fair number of political conversations, and we definitely don't see things the same way. We definitely don't have the same perspective, the same view on what's happening in the world, or what policies or to implement, or who to vote for, and those kinds of things. And yet we can still love each other, appreciate each other, work together, have great conversations about work and non-work and political stuff, and respect, appreciate, love each other, and just be together and learn from each other, very importantly.
Yes, absolutely. It's exciting to do this. We've had plenty of these conversations, but never recorded before. So here we go.
That's right. Yeah, we started talking about this some years ago, and I was like, oh, Beth, I have a secret wish, a secret dream. I'd love to do this. And then it just kind of got busy with other stuff, and now we're here. So, how do we start today? Do we, so the idea, okay, so can I share the intro? So it was born out of my research into politics, from my side, right? So that I always consider myself a Democrat. And then after Trump got elected, I started actually spending a lot of time, like studying and reading everything. And I realized that the Democrat Party was not the party for me anymore because of the policies that I saw that they were advocating. And I realized, I don't think that they actually work to do what I want them to do. But what the big realization for me was that the things I wanted for society, for people in the country, whether it's America where I live or Denmark where I'm from, were the same. It was just my beliefs about the policies and the strategies that changed. And that gave me hope that we could bridge the political divide if we could have a conversation about, instead of like, oh, I like this policy, no, I like that policy, that we could have a conversation about, hey, what are our values and what are the outcomes that we want for people? And then we can come together and crowdsource. Like, I'm an open source software guy. We can crowdsource the way to get there the best. And so that was really what spawned it. And then later I realized, those are not the kinds of conversations we have, and there's a reason why, and all of that stuff. We can get to that. But really, it was based on, hey, we actually kind of want the same thing. Let's actually work together and figure out how to get there.
Yeah, I still remember a conversation we had when we were walking around your apartment sometime in New York, and we were able to agree on what we wanted. I can't remember now what this topic was exactly, but we agreed on what we wanted long term, but couldn't agree on what policy change do we make now to get us there? What are we willing to sacrifice between here and there in order to get there? It was really exciting to me because you and I do come from different perspectives, but to find some shared common ground, even if we couldn't figure out the next step, just having a sense of where we're going is exciting to be able to agree on that.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. And it's like, if we can figure out what success looks like, right, then we can figure out how to get there. What does success look like? What is it we want for society? And like, as you know, what I came up with is, we want people to be happy, healthy, prosperous, and safe. Happy, healthy, prosperous, and safe. And we want a thriving economy, which is linked to prosperity, right? But I also see it as a growing economy, that there's the standard of living is going up for people as a whole, for society as a whole. We want a safe, like a healthy planet that can sustain human and animal and plant life for thousands, like forever, right? It's not like we're running out of planet of Earth. Those are the things that, for me, at a high level, that I care about. And I thought, like, is there something missing? Is there another one? Is there any one of these that we can't agree that we want? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think we might have different definitions about how to get there, like we've talked about, or even what exactly those things mean. The
Mm-hmm.
only thing that feels like it might be maybe missing is something around self-determination, right?
Mm.
Like people having the ability to define for themselves what happiness looks like, what
Yeah,
health looks like, what safety means
I
for
love it.
them.
Okay.
Um, yeah, that I think that's important to me, right? Because what happiness or health looks like to me might be different than you.
Yeah.
How do we build in self-determination,
Yeah.
autonomy,
I love that.
something like that? Yeah, because I
Yeah.
think that's one of the big questions we face as a society is how do we allow for as much self-determination and autonomy as possible while also having some collective values and expenses and
Mhm.
you know
Yeah.
that balance between autonomy and
I love
collectivity.
that. And I think so that points to, so one points to another element that I talk about that, which is the values. Because we can have an outcome, but we can have we can agree on outcomes, but one person's values say like anything goes. The other says like you can't lie, you can't murder, you can't steal, like whatever. Right. So it sounds like the self-determination agency, that's a word I used, agency, freedom, but self-determination I like a lot. That would be one of the values.
For me, at
Yeah.
least. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm 100% with that. Yeah, I like that a lot. And it's actually something I haven't spent a lot of time discussing, or I
Mm-hmm.
haven't really figured out my framework for like what values should guide us on this.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have wrote some of that in my book, but yeah, that's an
And
important part of it.
it is important. And I think the other piece of that too around collective responsibilities is another one that we have to have some agreements around. Like what do we
Mm-hmm.
share responsibility for as a society?
Mm-hmm.
What don't we? And I think that's
Uh-huh.
a value that's going to take some
Yeah.
hashing out. Yeah. And it
Uh-huh.
looks differently currently in the US in different places, I think where you are. Like you live in New York City, I live in rural Ohio. We live in very different realities,
Say
day
more
to
about that.
day realities. Well, you've talked about how you step outside your door in New York and you see things that are coming from a certain political perspective, mostly from the left. Um, I walk outside my door and I see things that are coming from a different political perspective, like mostly from the
Mm.
right. Um, and that, like, I open my newspaper, my little local newspaper, and it is full of uh, stuff that's coming from the right.
Mm.
Full of it. That's not your experience, right? Like we
Yeah.
swim in very different waters day to
Yeah.
day,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we are very different people in those waters, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
we can
Yeah.
talk.
So help me understand, was there a connection between that and the collective responsibility piece?
Yeah, there was. I think like um, I'm connected to somebody on Facebook, a local person, and she's writing asking for people to help figure out a way to raise enough money and find labor to build ramps for a couple of gentlemen who are disabled
Mm,
veterans and they can't get in and out of their homes right now because they don't
mm,
have ramps. And she's looking for local community support to help
mhm.
do that because she hasn't found other resources to make that happen.
Right.
And the community will respond. Like I guarantee you that by tomorrow there will be money, there will be contractors, like people will have stepped up and helped, and those guys will have ramps probably within the next week or so because there's
Eh,
this sense of collective responsibility here.
mhm.
I don't know that exists where you are.
And what do you feel about that? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's great. I think it's
Yeah.
also sad that she hasn't found other resources, that we have to rely on like local individuals to do that. And I think part of that is that she hasn't looked, right? She doesn't know what the resources are.
Mhm.
I think I'm a social worker by training, right? Like I spent the first 15 years of my career doing social work. I have a pretty good handle on what the resources are out there. And I started making
Mhm.
some notes about like, have you checked this place? Have you checked that place? Like, what about this kind of grant? Like, what about that? And
Mhm.
I haven't looked into it enough to be able to offer anything meaningful yet,
Right.
but I will. I know that stuff does exist. And so there's some collective responsibility that we want government to take. And then
Mhm.
there's collective responsibility that we want individuals to take,
Mhm.
both.
And so when you're saying excuse me, sorry if I wasn't didn't get it all, but like when you're saying like I forgot what you just say, it was sad that there weren't other resources. Are you talking, is that's government, but it could also be like charities or things like that? Or is it specifically government?
Both. Like what my initial thought was like, actually, it was sad that she didn't know that there are other
Mm-hmm.
resources, right? Like I think
Mm-hmm.
that they exist. I need to look
Mm-hmm.
further. I think they exist and that she could probably tap into them. But
Yeah.
because she doesn't know about them or because they're hard to access or they're slow, she's
Mm-hmm.
looking for individual help right now.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, for me, I love anything that people can do for each other that doesn't involve the government.
sure.
Like, I think that's freaking awesome. And I would love to see the government being way smaller and just people have way more resources to do that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
For each other.
Yeah. No, I have some conflict around that because I agree with you. I think what individuals can do for each other is amazing. But what happens if that doesn't exist for some reason? Like what kind of safety net do we need? Um,
Yeah. Right.
and how
And
do we make sure it works? That safety net
yeah,
is effective. Yeah.
no, totally. And that's, I think that's one of the fundamental challenges is, and I think also probably some of the fundamental differences in people's wirings, because for me, what I see is that it's like I remember years ago when one of the people I was following and reading, his name is Bruce Schneier, and he was a cryptography expert on like computer security, and he explained how like, and then he started writing about terrorism and applying some of that security mind thinking to the world of terrorism. One of the points he made is like when you, for example, like TSA screening at airports, this is a cost that you're incurring on everybody, a known cost, right? The delays, the slowdowns, the cost of this machinery is fixed. We know what the
Mm-hmm.
cost is, and it's massive. The
Yeah.
cost of lost productivity and lost flights, and like just the cost of all the people and machines. All there's just a lot. There's a lot of freaking money, especially counting people's time, right? And then what you're preventing is a probability. Like, what's the likelihood that something bad happens, and what's the cost that it does? And people tend to forget to do the math on that because we're emotional beings. But the math that you need to do is what is the likelihood percentage wise times what is the cost if it does happen. And if your fixed
Mm-hmm.
cost to prevent it is higher than that, then you're making a bad trade. Yeah.
Mathematically
Um,
speaking. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so all of this as a way to say, yes, we like to have the government do it because we're like, then we're sure it's taken care of. But the cost of doing that is that I would argue it's less efficient every time the government has to do it. Some money gets siphoned, like gets lost in bureaucracy and whatever. So like not all the money goes to the people
Mm-hmm.
we're helping. That's true for private organizations,
Mm-hmm.
nonprofits, et cetera, as well. But it's like if it's just person to person, that's not really an issue. And people fall through the cracks of the government as well, or
Sure.
they're ill served in different ways where they were enabling people to stay in a behavior that is not
Mm-hmm.
helpful for them, et cetera. So there's cost there as well, right? And so it becomes a trade-off of what do we think on balance is going to give the best result. And
Yeah.
that's a conversation that I don't have the answer to. I don't, but we can.
Yeah.
That's a conversation we can have, right?
It's interesting to think about because the reason I interrupted you and said something about like mathematical answer or
Mm-hmm.
whatever is because then you also do need to factor in the emotional part, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
like so maybe the cost, like just using the TSA example, and I have no idea of the numbers, but maybe the cost doesn't work out with the TSA,
Mm-hmm.
right? But how do you factor in the fact that if somebody gets on the airplane with a bomb in their shoe, it kills 150 people? Is that a cost that we as a culture are willing to accept?
Sure.
And what's the probability that we're preventing it with TSA? Because
Mm-hmm.
we all know that people sneak things onto airplanes sometimes. Like it's not
Mm-hmm.
impossible to do something. So I guess I shouldn't say that. We don't all know. I didn't provide any facts, but it seems to me
It's all right.
possible that somebody could
Yeah.
still sneak, something
Sure.
dangerous onto an airplane, even with all of
Yeah.
our security measures. But it's less likely to be a bomb and more likely to
Mhm.
be something sharp. you know? So
Mhm.
like how do we factor in that emotional piece as well? Like what's our risk
Yeah,
tolerance as a society?
it's a great question, and I think the there's a couple of answers. One is that when it comes to policy, I think we need to like in my mind, it works best if we're like policy wise, we assign numbers to it and we can do the math. Like as a matter of policy, we have to assign a dollar value to the cost of a life,
Mm.
of a human life. Like we have to,
Yeah.
right?
Interesting.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's just like how much money are we willing to spend to save a human life? There has to be a number somewhere, and it's a conversation we need to have. It's
Yeah. That's
not an
interesting.
emotional conversation. Hmm?
That's an interesting concept. Like, is that, I don't know that we have that as a culture. Like, we certainly haven't agreed on what that dollar amount is. It's
No,
not been
no,
a public
it's not.
conversation.
No, no, exactly. No, it's not a
Yeah.
conversation we have, but
Yeah.
obviously there has to be a number, right? Like at some point we're simply running out of money to do
Right.
this, Like is it how like yeah, how much is that? And yeah, it's an
Yeah.
uncomfortable conversation to have, but again, at,
Interesting.
at a level of policy, it's just like we
Hmm.
have to be able to talk about it. I mean, insurance companies, I'm guessing, like
Yeah.
do this kind of thing. Well, I guess
Yeah.
it's a little bit different because they're just doing the actuarial thing on it, like what is the likelihood, et cetera. But it's just, I mean, it's a fact. And the other piece I would say is, well, I mean, well, just to belabor the first point, like when it comes to the TSA, right? Like there's always more that we can do. Right? We
Right.
have more machines, we have more screening, we have more intrusive, like like in surveillance and wiretaps, and then we get into the question of
Mhm.
values, right? Like
Right.
what are we willing to do? We're not willing to, like there's certain bill of rights or assumption of innocence or like
Hmm.
what is it, warrantless surveillance. Like there used to be a boundary that said we're not going to spy on Americans, and then Patriot Act,
Right.
and then it's like, oh yeah, we are willing to spy on Americans, and then Snowden comes out and he's like, oh, we're actually spying way more than we ever said we were, da, 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 we're lying about it, right? So there
Right.
used to be a line that's been crossed. um and yeah, with the TSA we could always do more, and some we have to draw the line somewhere. But in terms of the emotional, I think this is probably one of my core beliefs, is that ultimately we're each responsible for our own feelings.
Hmm.
All right. Because we can all, like, our feelings are a consequence of our beliefs. And we can always, like, our minds will make up beliefs, right? That like, oh, like, you've seen my dog. She's very small, adorable, cute, not super frightening. We brought her onto an airplane, and all valid, right? All following the rules. And she was sitting in my lap. The plane was on the ground, and there was this lady across the aisle from me, and she was panicking because that dog was in my lap and she wasn't leashed at the moment. And she wasn't like, she was across the aisle. I just think she was even a row in front of me, but she was panicking. And I'm very empathetic towards that. Like
Right.
clearly she had some prior experience
Yeah.
with dogs
Yeah.
and some story about that. But like people, we do this all the time as people, that we have beliefs that something out there, this dogs are dangerous, or like this thing Byron Katie loves to talk about, like you see a piece of rope lying on the like by the path that you're walking down, but you think it's a snake, and so it's a
Mm.
snake, and you get terrified, and then you realize it's a piece of rope, and once you realize it's a piece of rope, it won't scare you anymore. It's all about the beliefs. And so, you know our fears are the same, our feelings around these events are the same, right? We cannot, again, I guess we can take it into account, but at the end of the day, we cannot, as a society, be held hostage to specifically individuals' emotions. We can choose to look at, like, all right, generally people in this society have these feelings, and like in a democracy, we can obviously say, hey, I have these feelings around this thing, and feelings matter. Feelings are kind of, at some level, all that matters in life, right?
Right.
We do everything because we want to feel some way. But we have to acknowledge that feelings are ultimately our own responsibility, or that's how I feel about it. See, I feel.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I agree that feelings are important and also are very dependent on people's past experiences, on their brain chemistry, on what they ate for breakfast, all of that. And of course,
That
my cat's
too.
going to join us. Got to go
Yeah.
get Yasmin so she can join us too.
I know, right?
Um, yeah, but that as a society, I don't know that we have a good mechanism for talking about that, like talking about feelings, talking about how they play into policies.
Yeah.
We elect people to Congress. Congress decides how much money to spend on the TSA, right? Like that's
Hmm.
like they set that
Yeah.
budget, right? So
Well, and I think, I mean, and my belief around that is that Congress decides how much to spend on TSA based on which manufacturers of which scanning machines pays them the most, kind of thing, right?
that would be interesting to look at. Like how
Yeah.
do yeah. I
My
do
belief is that they're not looking at how do we get the most amount of safety for the least amount of money, and like both in direct expenditure but also in the productivity cost and like the burden on the population. I have I would be
right.
shocked if that's the calculation that's being done, honestly.
It would be
that
really interesting to have that
that would be the
conversation.
job that we presumably hired them to do, not me because I don't get to vote, but that we as
Right. Yeah.
citizens hire our politicians to do. But I have no faith that that's happening.
Yeah. No, I don't either, honestly. I think you and I approach Congress with different lenses. But I think there are too many issues in front of them. There's too much politicking going on. Like there's not enough time or enough focus on those things. Like who is it exactly that has sat down and said, how do we get the most amount of safety for the least amount of money? Maybe somebody has, but I don't know about it. And I mean, I'd kind of like to look into that. I'd be curious to see if some committee somewhere has analyzed that or not. And if not, why not? Surely we should. It's a huge, like you said, it's
Well,
a huge expense.
it
Yeah.
is, right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is one of the big problems is that the way democracy works is we've got the legislative branch, Congress, we've got the executive branch, the presidency and the White House and the administration, and we've got the judiciary branch, the courts, and then we've got the fourth estate, the press. And really, if the press is not there to hold the officials accountable and dive into these things, then like what's the incentive for the elected officials to do the right thing in that case, other than their own sense of integrity and duty and obligation, which again I don't have a lot of faith in. And I in my view, based on me spending time looking into it, like our fourth estate is completely failing us. I don't
Yeah.
see anything about
How's,
this.
and I think like the other thing we have that we didn't used to have is a whole lot of like very siloed social media experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like that's another, like, I think a lot of Americans get their news from social media as
Oh,
opposed to
totally.
from news
Yeah.
sources. So even
Right.
like even one, one better, like one, I mean, one worse, right? Like, so like if you're getting your
Yeah.
news at least from a news source, even if it's a biased one, you've got something.
Yeah.
If you're getting it from social media, and I have you heard of you? I printed this out last night. This like media bias chart. Have you heard of this thing? Have you
I think
seen
I've
this?
seen that before. Yeah.
I find it really interesting because it breaks down, and you can the interactive one online. You can like click in and it shows you like what how they decided that CNN goes in one place and the New
Mm-hmm.
York Post goes in a different place, and they rank based on whether they skew left or skew right or like
Mm-hmm.
how far they go, but also on whether it's opinion or analysis or fact reporting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think most Americans get their news pretty far down
Mm-hmm.
into opinion,
Mm-hmm.
not fact reporting,
Yeah.
and that's
No, I mean, that's super interesting. So let me see here. I'm trying to get this like Zoom data thing here. I think that's you're saying like the media and then social media. I think the media the mainstream media or corporate media, or whatever we want to call that. I think that's been siloed as well, right? Tribalized, like
Right.
MSNBC and or like on one hand and
Right.
Fox News on the other, like they cater
Right.
it to their own individual audiences,
Yeah.
and it becomes more
Yeah.
about confirming preconceived notions than it becomes about exposing people to
Right.
what's true. So it's definitely media, and I think part of that, like it's I think the internet has been a huge part of that, right? Where Google and Facebook has taken most of the advertising revenue from these, and so now they
Right.
need their clickbaity kind of hardcore audiences and really need to engage people, which is the same that the algorithms on social media need to do to get people to stick and come back.
Right.
And I think it's a huge problem. And I would not agree. Um, I would question their assertion of who's more reliable and who's less reliable, because I think that's one
Mm.
of the things that I've seen in the corporate media, especially like the whole fact checking thing, and Snopes as one of the fact checking sites, where to me a lot of the fact checking is really fake, is really
Mm.
incorrect in my view.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I when I was looking at this last night, like the things that are at like the top center of this are things that are sources that I never go to, like USA Facts, Pew Research Center, something called Stars and Stripes that I've never even heard of before, right?
Right.
And when I looked them up, like they're purely fact based. Like here's some data, here's some, like it's very dry. It's
Mm-hmm.
very it's the opposite of clickbaity. It's very boring.
Right.
Um, and I haven't done a ton of digging to see whether I think they're reliable. But they're things I've
Yeah.
never heard of before. They're not, it's not Snopes, right? It's like
Yeah.
journalists, like professional journalists who presumably have checked these things. So
Yeah.
I'd like to learn more about them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I see also CBS Evening News, and what did I see? Um, and what is it? PBS, NPR, some of those, right?
yeah, those are like in the next tier down, right? Like that's a
Yeah.
mix of reporting and analysis, not purely fact or
Yeah. I mean, I'm
yeah.
just going to screen share here. Are we seeing the same things? Like up here, CBS Evening News is like right up there at the top of more
Oh no,
reliable.
I think that's a different thing that I'm.
Oh, okay. I was
Although
like,
wait,
oh,
it is the
yeah,
same.
it's
It
like
is the same source.
fact.
Is it the August 2024?
Yeah,
Yeah, my printout doesn't have
got it.
CBS up there. Mine has USA Facts at the top.
Got it. Yeah, I have USA Facts there. I've never seen that site before. So yeah,
Right, I never
definitely
had either.
similar.
I looked at it last night. It was fascinating. Yeah,
PolitiFact, like these. So yeah, but the broader point there is like, how do we agree on what the facts are, right? Like,
right.
because that's something like when I watched the Harris Trump debate, which was a train wreck. I think Trump did terribly, to be honest. But what I saw was Trump getting fact checked on a lot of things, and Harris, Kamala not getting fact checked on things like Trump getting fact checked on a bunch of things that were actually true, and her getting fact checked, not getting fact checked on a bunch of things she said that were false. Like
It's
that was how it
interesting.
it landed
Yeah.
in me. And I think the whole notion of the pattern that I see is like the media just like well, it was the one that I remember was the vice presidential debate. So Waltz Vance, right, where Vance jumps in and is like, well, like let me explain how this actually works, because they were debating whether the migrants were legal or illegal, and he's like, well, like the reason they call them legal is because they just change it so now you can apply with an app, and like anybody can get applied in like 5 minutes or something, and then the moderators were like, thank you for explaining how the legal process works. And I'm like, come on, guy. Like it's fair to say, yeah, like we like this type of immigration we used to call illegal, and now the rules got changed, or like, or even if it wasn't something we used to call illegal, like it's a dramatic change in how things used to be, and now like just saying, well, it's just legal migration, like it's not, that's not entirely truthful, right?
That there's nuance. Do you know when those
Yeah.
rules changed? Like when that changed? Because I don't. Like when
No,
that.
like, I mean, what they said in the debate was that, like, Wall said, well, this is a rule that dates back to 19 whatever, and then Vance said, yes, that's true, but like that rule didn't get used before, like it's a new thing, right?
Yeah, I'd like to know more about that because like my my experience of that was that during that debate, uh, prior to that point, Vance was doing a lot of like talking over, like a lot of trying to get as much airtime, like really like uh, arguing. I mean, it's a debate. That's what they're there to do. But it was fairly. He was not always stopping when his time was up, and he was not always being responsive to the questions. And so, like, I feel like there was some accumulation thing that happened there until finally they were like, "Yeah, we're done now." So
That's
my
funny.
experience was different. Yeah.
Yeah. Because my experience was that the moderators were so annoying, because like every time, like, you would hear, and this was both Vance and Walls, they would talk and then they would end and they were done. And then the moderators took it upon themselves to say, your time is up. I'm like, guy was already done. He'd stopped. I'm like, what's the why? Why do you need to,
That so didn't bother me at all. I was like, yeah,
no, but I'm like,
let's move on. Let's keep going.
yeah,
That was
yeah.
a very
Anyway,
boring debate,
but
I have to
I
say.
didn't, I
Yeah.
didn't experience that at all. That Vance was, I thought he was like trying to answer the questions. But one of the things that I see, and I don't remember that if that happened during this debate, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did. But like a lot of times, the questions are framed in a way that's kind of already biased or already assuming a certain answer. But
It's trying to get to a certain point. Sure. Yeah.
yeah, or imply a certain frame that
Mhm.
the person doesn't agree with. And but I can't remember specific examples, so we don't
No,
need
I'm
to.
sure that's true, but I think that's kind of how debates work, like on both sides. Like I did not experience those as biased
Mm-mm.
moderators or biased debates. Like I know some
I
people
think
felt like they were, and it sounds like maybe you did, but like
no,
I
I don't think I didn't find the VP to be debate to be super biased. A little bit, but that's, again, it's the media bias, right? That's like that the IC generally is very, very pro Democrat
mm,
against Trump. Like I've seen some tweets where people are like that were saying like, Kamala has like 90% positive, like they're just doing sentiment analysis of articles in corporate media between Kamala and Trump, and there was like 90% positive about Kamala and 80% negative about Trump. And even like the same proposals where Trump was proposing no tax on tips, and then Kamala proposed the same thing, and the media just was like super negative when Trump proposed it, and then positive when Kamala proposed it. Like,
I haven't
um,
seen those. I would love to see that.
no,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I can try to see if I can dig it up. But I think it definitely like goes to, there is, I think, in the circles that I swim in, like there's a lot of skepticism about the media and how they cover things, right? Yeah.
Sure. And I think one of the places that I have a issue with that is that people talk about the mainstream media or the media or the corporate as if it's all the same thing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's not. Like there's a wide variety of media outlets who have different funders, who have different histories, and there's more nuance there than the right wants to
Yeah.
talk.
I mean, that's interesting, because my view, my perspective, what I'm seeing is that is true. Let me see here. This is not exactly what I was looking for, but this is like one of the kinds of things that I've seen. Harris coverage, 80%, 84% positive. Trump coverage, 89% negative. I don't know what I guess this is between ABC, CBS, and NBC. I don't know what the sources are on this thing. It says something down here, MRC, whatever. I don't know what that is. I'm
And I don't
not
even
going to say that.
understand. that. The legacy media is election interference. I don't understand that headline.
Oh,
Like,
if they're just defaulting to be like 84% positive for Kamala, no matter what she does, and 89% negative for Trump, no matter what he does, then it is a form of an election
oh,
election interference, right?
that's interesting. But like, there's no, like, where's the data?
No, there's no data here, obviously. Like, and that's what
But
I'm
they don't
saying.
even
Like,
cite it, right? Like, I can't read that at the
well,
bottom, but
yeah, no, I don't see it either. This is some French Trump
Trump fact
fact
news.
news, French,
Like,
whatever. Yeah, yeah.
question your sources, Kelvin.
No, no, this is yeah, exactly right. No, I'm not claiming there is a source here. I'm just saying like these are
Yeah.
some of the things
Yeah.
that I've seen, and my experience from reading, like, and when I talk like reading media, and when I say that I mean like Washington Post and CNN and the stuff that I see on MSNBC and the things that I see on CBS and ABC and 60 Minutes, all that's it kind of matches with my experience as well, reading, consuming those media. But I think so. To your point that there's a wide variety, I I think there is to some extent, but there's also not. And here's what I mean, and again, this is what I see is like there's obviously Fox News, which kind of is like a conservative news network, and
Mhm.
then there is more or less all the rest. That's not true, but like there's much more broad consensus between a lot of the others, which is why Fox News came to be, right? There's like, all right, let's be an opposite to the consensus amongst the others. And it's not that there's consensus on everything, but I would argue that there is consensus on the big things. And there is this tendency to have like to see the same exact words, the same description of events
Mhm.
on sometimes all the I'd say non-Fox. There's others than Fox. I just don't really know what they are because I don't pay that close attention. But like
Mhm.
the same on all across all media, or the same across all the non-Fox or non-obviously right-wing media.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's not my experience. Like, I feel like there's a set on the right, like Fox News, New York Post, Daily Wire. Like, there's a bunch of them over there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
Got it.
bunch that
Yeah.
are kind of more to the far left, like Huffington
Mm-hmm.
Post or MSNBC or like
Got
some
it.
of
Got
those. And then there are things more in the middle,
mm-hmm.
like I would put my experience has been things like CNN or Axios or
Mm-hmm.
um, Wall Street Journal, that
Yeah.
tend to be more in the center. And
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's a
Yeah. Yeah.
range,
No, I
but
think.
like, yeah, that there is more variety there. And that I'll intentionally sometimes go and seek out, like, I'll go and look and see, like, what is Fox saying about this? What is MSNBC saying about this? What
Mm-hmm.
is the AP saying about this? And like, look at each of those three sources. Those are the ones I tend to, when I'm trying to compare.
Yeah.
Um, and it's fascinating to see the
Mm-hmm.
difference. Like, I think there is a big difference in how they report. I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember the last thing I did that with.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't
I
know.
love that. So I think that's yeah, I agree. So New York Post tends to be right wing, is like, yeah, it tends to be right wing. Fox for sure. Daily Wire I don't consider mainstream media or corporate media. I consider that more of like Rush Limbaugh, like more of that like underground kind of media landscape. But it's interesting because like I remember when I discovered Daily Wire some years ago, and then I was like, why do they have these shitty ads? Like, why are the ads on Daily Wire so crappy, so garbage? And then later I learned that, well, it's because like the mainstream advertising networks won't touch them.
Mm-hmm.
So they can only advertise like these like tabula like native ads and like garbage ads, right? And it's one of the things that Musk has come up against after he bought Twitter is that they're like, what was it? I think it was like ADL or something that did this study where they like did a bunch of shenanigans to make it look like there was like Nazi propaganda to get everybody to stop advertising on Twitter as a way to get at Twitter for not wanting to censor the way that they wanted to, right? So I think
Right.
that's one of the good examples of how advertisers, or rather like ADL, or I forget, I think it's ADL, but like organizations like the Media Matters is something that I hear coming up as well many
I
times.
don't know what ADL is.
American Defamation League,
Oh, Anti-Defamation League.
Anti-Defamation League. Yeah, I think it's in. I'm not entirely sure, but we can find that out. But basically, organizations that threaten platforms to, you know, to withdraw advertising money if they don't do whatever they want
Right.
them to do, and that then also threaten companies that advertise on those platforms, against their will.
Isn't that the free market at work in part? Right? Like
It
they do
no,
that because they know that I, or an alleged me as a consumer, doesn't want my
I I no,
t-shirt company advertising, like
yes, to some extent it is the free market at work, but it's still, and Elon is making X work without it. But if it's like a, I think it's one of the problems I have is that this whole like boycotting kind of thing, right? Like if you have the wrong opinion, then we need to boycott you, because
right.
it's not like in this case again, they worked really hard to fabricate something to complain about. It wasn't an honest assessment that this
Mm.
platform is bad for advertisers. It was, you know, it was kind of faked, right? So what is it really about? It's more about using something as a cudgel, as an excuse to shut down people you don't agree with. And I mean, and again, like, yeah, it's the market that does this. I just, it's not something that I agree with. And so it's something that we want to call attention to. And to the extent that, say, the ADL is heralded by the media as like a watchdog, or there's like they're lying or covering up about what's actually happening, that is a problem in the media.
Right. So yeah, there's a lot there. Like I think obviously we don't want people making up stories, right? Like stories need
Mm-hmm.
to be grounded in some facts, and like we need some sources that we can collectively trust and say like that group of people does a good job of fact checking. Like maybe that's part of what's missing currently. So that's one point. But like the other is um I think boycotting is one of the powers that we have as citizens, not exactly as citizens, as consumers,
Mm-hmm.
is to say, like, I do or don't want to spend my money with this company. It doesn't mean that I don't think that company has the right to exist or that they shouldn't have their opinions. Like, absolutely, go ahead if you go for it. But I choose not to spend my money on that. I think it's a little bit complicated, right? Like I only have so many choices of water companies or electric companies or whatever. Like I don't have free choice currently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was just looking at the ADL thing because that's not something I'd heard of, and I found this statement that they made back 2023, the fall of 2023, and it said like basically we appreciate
Mm-hmm.
that they're trying to address anti-Semitism. Um, we have not been pulling the strings to like get advertisers to stop. Indeed, we ourselves were advertising there until the Anti-Defamation League's attacks. We're preparing
Mm-hmm.
to do so again. Better, healthier, safer X would be a win for the world. Like to me, this seems pretty
Yeah.
sane, like that seems very sane, very
Yes.
helpful.
I mean,
Yeah.
sounds reasonable.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and sometimes people lie. And so
Right. So is it true that they weren't like advertising attacks, but like it feels like we like that we that's something that we would need to figure
yeah.
out, right? Like, how do we
And,
how do we answer that question? Like we can't just take Elon Musk's word for it, right?
right.
Like can't take anybody's word for it. We have to figure it out.
Yeah, no, and this is one of the huge problems. This is why it's so problematic, that if we can't trust our media to do this, right? That's like,
Right.
yeah, it's huge. And I think it is one of the big problems is that we don't have a trusted source of fact checking these things. And and then like the both sides thing is not like really helpful. Like, well, this side says this side says like that. Like we want to get down to something deeper, right? If it's
Right.
like, well, this side says this and that side says this, so let's just pick something in the middle. Well, that incentivizes people to just to go more extreme to draw the middle to like where they want.
Right.
Like that doesn't work. So you have
Yeah.
to find a way to do that. And it's I haven't seen any. It's like something that I would love to do, and it's part of what I'd love to do with this conversation in this podcast. I
Yeah.
when Jimmy Wales launched Wiki Tribune as like a crowdsourced approach to the news, I was all in, and I was a founding member, and I poured money. And then what I saw was just as hopelessly biased as everything I'd seen from the Washington Post, and I was like,
It feels like
this
to
is
me, it
not
has
good.
to be professional. Like it has to be like this is what journalists are supposed to do. So who out there is doing that? Who has been trained?
Yeah.
Two independent sources. Like save your evidence. Like it's a research paper, right? Like I know how to write a research
Mhm.
paper. They trained me on how to do that. Like somewhere,
Yeah.
some journalist ought to be doing that. Like who can I trust? Like who's
Yeah.
doing that?
That's a great question. And yeah, I mean, at this point, I don't have a lot of faith in journalists. I think most of them are
Right, but
not
like
very good at
that's
doing
what
their
they're
job.
supposed to do. So
I
if that
know.
doesn't exist, if you and I, who are both like reasonable and intelligent people, like if you and I can't find a source that we can both say that one
Hmm.
is doing a good job of
Hmm.
fact checking and reporting news,
Hmm.
then that right there feels like the heart of the crisis, right? Because then
It
we no
is
longer have a shared source of truth as a
correct.
culture. And
Yeah.
without a shared source of truth, we're just
Yeah.
flinging accusations all around. Like,
Yes.
yeah,
The question though is, did we ever?
I have no idea. I think
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I feel like 30 years ago, people used to rely on like USA Today, the AP,
Hmm.
like those sources more than they
Yeah.
do now. I don't know
Yeah.
to what extent they were 100% trustworthy.
Yeah.
Um, but we need that as a culture. And yeah, we need that as a culture. I think if all we can do is say we can't trust anyone, then we can't have a conversation,
Yeah.
right?
It's, I mean, and you're right. I mean, it's a huge problem. You're a huge problem. It's you're not a problem. You're solution. You're the solution.
I'm sure
No,
you think
it's
of
a
that
huge
sometimes.
problem. It's it's a huge problem. And yeah, I just don't have a good answer. Like I think it's just recognizing that we're on our own, and it's an impossible task. But
Mm,
we have to you can't trust anything. You can't trust, you can, what, in my view, you can trust the government to give you the official government line. Doesn't mean it's true, but it means it's what the
right.
government wants you to believe is true.
Has
Yeah.
decided to say. Uh-huh.
And you can trust the media to give you the official media narrative. It doesn't mean it's true, but it's what the media collectively, or whichever media you read, wants you to believe. And then you can trust social media to show you things that are true and things that are complete fabrications and things that are partially true and things that are
Right.
partial, and just like, yeah, I wish there was a good answer, and maybe that's the business that we need to create is a
Right.
an organization that just honestly tries to get at answers and just is not playing the clickbaity game and is just genuinely trying to make sense of things and trust that enough people are willing to pay like $5 a month to get decent answers from people that you somewhat trust, like,
Right. Who will
or that
show
at
their
least will
work.
show their exactly right, and
Yeah.
be real about our bias. Like we're not
Right.
like trying to hide that we have bias, but
Sure.
we're trying to get at a shared understanding. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that's
That's
what we need to
exciting.
do.
Yeah.
Fuck some player. We're gonna do this. We can do this.
Oh,
Yeah.
that. No, that is really exciting because I think that is so important and it's so
Yeah.
missing. And how do we have like
Yeah.
how do I have a conversation with my neighbor who has a very
Mhm.
different political perspective than I do when what he thinks is true about the world is not what I think is true about the world and vice
Right.
versa, right? Like
Yeah.
and what do we point to? How do we have a
Yeah.
conversation?
And I
Yeah.
think it's part of, I mean, I have a sort of somewhat dark view of this whole thing. Like, I think there are powerful forces that are pulling the strings that are keeping us traumatized and scared and confused and want us to just be fighting each other and see different realities, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I
and
don't
but
quite
it
follow
doesn't
you
mean that,
there.
huh?
I don't quite follow you there, but I do
No,
think that having facts is
yeah,
essential. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's cool. It's a great place to start.
Yeah.
And the fascinating thing is this phrase that Scott Adams, the Dilbert cartoonist, says, which is two movies, one screen. Like we watch the same stuff and we're watching two separate movies looking at it, right? Because we
Mm-hmm.
see different versions of events, but also because we look at the same events and just interpret them differently because we already have these preconceived notions,
Right.
right? If you've
Yeah.
been told like time and time and time again that Trump is literally Hitler and he's a racist and he's just a bad person, and then you hear him say something, then you're
Mhm.
gonna hear it that way. And if you're someone who's like Trump is a wonderful person, a loving person, a like just
Right.
really loves his country and wants to build everybody up and he wants the best for everybody, and you hear him say the same thing, and it's just you just interpret it very differently, right?
Right.
So our preconceived notions really determine how things land. Same thing,
Yeah.
just hear it very differently.
Yeah. And those, what you call preconceived notions, I can agree with that phrase, but also like our life experiences, right? Like we talked a little bit about the Vance debate earlier. And I think I
Mm-hmm.
told you right after it happened that like my emotional experience of that was different than your emotional experience of that, in part because of my personal experiences in the
Mm-hmm.
past as a woman,
Yeah, yeah.
and yours are different as a man. And so like those previous experiences we have are part of what create those beliefs that create the feelings that then create those responses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all of our history, right? From I was born in Denmark and I was like, and
Right.
the way that our parents treated us or how what this school
Mm-hmm.
teacher did in fourth grade, whatever, right? Like all of
Right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
All of that becomes part of it. And
Yep.
I think that leads to one of the things for me is again when we get triggered by what happens in politics, which I think happens a lot by design, but every time we get triggered, it's an opportunity to look at what the trigger is, because the trigger is always about me and not the person or the event or whatever that triggers me.
Right.
And it's an invitation and opportunity to look at that and get more freedom inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like, I think one of the things that I've learned over the past 6 years that we've worked together is to be able to experience a trigger that I have and understand how to move through it in a way that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't invalidate my emotions or my previous experiences, but also helps me to move into a place where I can experience less reactivity and more clarity. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can still have the same, I may still come out of that with the same belief or the same um, opinion about something, but my experience of that all can be very different in terms of how I
Yeah.
emotionally react to something.
Yeah.
And that's very empowering for me.
Yeah.
And I've seen you do that too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and jumping into this whole world of politics for me and writing the book that I'm writing is definitely triggering. I mean, no,
Sure.
not gonna lie. Like it's definitely triggering. And like people are having reactions, and I'm sometimes shocked at the emotional reactions people have when I state something that is pretty matter of fact and backed up by evidence, and then just people hear something completely different from what I'm saying, and I'm like, yeah, it's definitely something for for me to wrap my head around. Oh, like, oh, people hear it this way. Yeah.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
I don't like that. I don't enjoy it.
I'm sure. Yeah.
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 But also like we people do get very emotional about this, and like we can't as a society let ourselves walk around on eggshells worried about you know
Hmm.
people who are easily triggered getting triggered
Right.
by
No,
things.
definitely not. No, definitely not. And also, I think recognizing that, especially right now in America, it can feel kind of existential to people on both sides of the
Hmm.
current political divide.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
a lot of people on both sides who are saying that they're very, very afraid. They are scared for the future of American democracy, like deep reactivity on both sides. That's part of why things are so fraught right now.
And isn't that it's wild, right? So can we talk about that for a minute?
Mhm.
Like, what are you seeing there from in with from your perspective? What are you seeing about people being feeling like this is like a really important election? What
Well,
are
it's
they worried?
interesting. I hear people on, like I said, on both sides who seem to think that um, if the other person, if, people on the left who
Mhm.
think that if Trump gets elected, people on the right who think that if Harris gets
Yeah,
elected, it will be the end of American democracy.
yeah,
That
yeah,
it's, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
and being pretty panicky about that. But both the Republicans
yeah,
and the Democrats being pretty panicky about that.
which is
Um,
fascinating.
yeah.
I know the right wing story about that. And I'm happy to share what I'm seeing, which is probably the same that you're seeing. What are you seeing on the Kamala side of things? Like, what is the fear there?
Oh, I think the fear is that if Trump is elected, that he will either not give up power peacefully at the
Hmm.
end of his 4 years. He will bring to bear, military or other resources to target people who he wants to target. Um, and we could talk about that.
Yeah.
That he would be a pawn of Russia and would jeopardize people's safety,
Hmm.
American safety, or other people's safety, like ally safety.
Hmm.
Or not just a pawn of Russia, also like Saudi Arabia is like people talk about, Trump's in their pockets, like they're, yeah. So like, there's a lot of, I think those would be the three big fears. Like,
Okay.
and maybe I
Okay.
should, I haven't, I hate to say that because I feel like I should do a little bit more digging there, but those are the ones that come top to mind. And the
Yeah.
first one about like, if he's elected, he
Yeah.
won't give up
One
power or
one
he
sec.
will use
One
his
sec.
power
Okay. Yeah. I just want to say,
against,
like,
yeah.
for me, like, one of the important things that I want to get across with this is like, we're just trying to live our freaking lives. Like, I have a deep passion for this. You're quite obviously interested, but we
Mhm.
also have lives to live, and so we don't have the
Oh, yeah.
time to like. This is not a full time job, right? So
Right.
we have
Yeah.
to try to make sense of things without having like dug into everything. So I'd love to hear, yeah, what you were saying about like what based on what you're seeing. What are your thoughts
Mhm.
on that, or what? Yeah, I interrupted. I'm sorry.
It's fine. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I guess I was second guessing myself because I am wondering if there's more there. Like, I don't want to speak for other
No, no,
people.
it's fine. So not
But
giving up power, using military resources to target people, and then like being a pawn of Russia and Saudi Arabia and other people. What do you think about the not giving up power? What are your thoughts?
what do I personally think about that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that he showed us before that that he would not necessarily give up power peacefully. Um, I'm not sure we have time today to go into all of this
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
in as much detail as we would need to. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I have some concern that Trump is not a fair actor, that he's not playing by the rules of American democracy, that he's trying to rig the system, you know.
Got it.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, yeah, yeah. To me, it's like, I mean, um, he did give up power, right? He left on January 20th, and like there was no drama or anything. Um, Second, like what choice does he have? Like the Secret Service
Right.
is all around him with guns and shit. Like, he's like, I'm not
Like,
leaving. They're carrying his ass out of there.
but I guess I don't want a president that I think, oh, but the Secret Service would kick him out, right? Like, I want a president who's like, oh, we had an election and now it's somebody else's turn. And I'm going to do
Right.
everything I can to set them up for success. Because
Sure.
part of the principle of American democracy is that it goes back and forth, right? Like there will always be
Of
different
course.
people in different parties getting elected, and so
And
we have to pass that baton in a way that is productive.
and if you genuinely believed that Trump genuinely believed that the election was stolen, rigged, fraudulent, to the point where it changed the outcome of the election, what would you expect him to do?
Well, I mean, that's a big if, because
I
I
know.
don't believe that. But if a politician, let me take names out of it, if a politician genuinely believed that the election that just ousted them was conducted in a illegal manner, which I think is what you're asking, like it didn't follow the rules, what
Mm-hmm.
should they do? So what's the system we have for that? It would be lawsuits. It would be the Supreme Court. It would be filing
Mm-hmm.
some kind of
Mm-hmm.
objection that said this, here's exactly why I believe that it was an illegal election, and it goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decides and they abide by that decision even if they disagree with it, because that's the system that we have. Yeah, I think that's my
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah. And because I think, I mean, to me, what I think what happened is that like he genuinely believes that the election was rigged, was stolen, was unfair in some way. Um, and given that, it would be his duty to you know to call that out. But then when the legal process fails and then like he's not going to like try to stay in power, right? But he's going to keep fighting for what he believes is true.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I disagree with you. I think Trump knows that he lost the election.
Okay.
Like there's like he said in the debate, like, oh, he lost by a whisker or whatever. Like I think there've been other pieces like that where I think he knows he lost it. But I think, yes, I guess I would expect that person, whoever it was, to file that lawsuit, abide by it, and then continue to talk about it. If they genuinely think it was wrong, then they continue to talk about it and they try to leverage change. But they
Right.
do that in a way that is clearly for the good of the democracy, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
In
and
that vein, like not in order to complain that things didn't go their way in the past, but to
right.
say we have this problem, and I'm going to calmly and clearly and in a high rung kind of way articulate that
Yeah.
problem
Right.
and try to
Well,
leverage smart,
yeah.
balanced, rational people to address it, which is not
Yes.
what he's doing.
No, I mean this is not Trump's game for sure. No, I mean that's not his style. No, I agree with you. Like
No,
I
but that's
would
what
I
I would
would love to
expect.
see that.
That's what I would expect from a president. Like, I
Sure.
would expect a president to have that level of emotional maturity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's not Trump. No, I agree. Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, what I've seen about that was that most of like there were lawsuits brought, but most of them were thrown out for lack of standing or other reasons. Like they didn't actually go to court. They didn't actually go to trial. And the the media that I've seen, the stories that I've seen is that most of those were like highly partisan judges, or like they were not they're basically not allowed to go to trial because then you have discovery and evidence and whatever, so that like there would be things come out. But there have been plenty of questionable things that would indicate that probably something happened. And another way to look at it is, hmm?
I would dispute
Go
some of
ahead.
what you just said. Like, I think
Yeah,
part of
yeah, I'm
what you
sure.
just
I'm
said is
just
like coming from a certain perspective. Yeah.
no, yeah,
So,
absolutely. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying like that's what I've seen. Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
And another argument I've heard is like I think we've American elections have been there's been fraud in every American election for many years. Like I think famously there was like Nixon versus JFK and Sinatra and the mafia and like whatnot. There's like some stories about that.
Okay.
So it's not that there's no fraud. It's just like how much is there, and
Right.
is it changing the outcome of the election?
Right.
And in that election in particular, people were told over and over again that this guy was literally Hitler. And so if you're presented with an opportunity to do some shenanigans and you think that you're preventing Hitler from coming to power, you might be inclined to actually do that more so than in your ordinary election.
Right. I was just so like what you're saying there is that the judges that the court those cases came before, and I think there were like 50 or 60 of them, right? Some of which were just some of which made it in front of judges and some of which didn't. Um, but like that the judges in those cases dismissed them because out of bias, right? Like so you're like that
Well,
perspective, and I'm not saying it's yours, but that
yeah,
perspective kind of alleges like widespread judicial malfeasance.
yes. Yeah. And I think it's definitely one of the allegations.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Across lots of different jurisdictions. Like that's
yeah.
so maybe, right? Like maybe, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
haven't that hasn't been proven to me, you know? Like
No.
if dozens of lawsuits are failed or dismissed by judges, like maybe they deserved it. So
Yeah.
maybe they weren't
And
enough
that
evidence to
is,
bring that lawsuit, you know?
it's a possibility. Whereas I think I saw, um, um, a summary on Wikipedia that said 30 lawsuits that were dismissed by the judging after a hearing on the merits. And yeah, it says nearly all the suits were dismissed or dropped due to lack of evidence or lack of standing. So, yeah, among the
Yeah.
judges dismissed the lawsuits were some appointed by Trump himself. So,
Right. Right. So what do we
I
know?
don't
Yeah.
know.
I was just
Like
looking
the
too, and
bigger.
like USA Today had this article in here, and it linked to this report, Lost Not Stolen, the conservative
Mm-hmm.
case that Trump lost and Biden won. And like, I haven't read this yet, but this looks like something that's worth reading there. Like, the USA Today says that this, where did that go?
Yeah.
Here it is. 8 conservative legal experts published this report reviewing the evidence in 64 cases, found that Trump didn't provide enough evidence of widespread election fraud. Like, to
Right.
me, that seemed pretty
Well,
fact
two
based, you
things,
know?
two things on that. It's not clear. So I think the question is why are elections in this country so hard to audit?
Yeah,
It
sure.
should be a straight up thing that we have some way of ensuring that only people who are eligible to vote actually vote, and that we can go back and recount, and every
Mhm.
single discrepancy between what was said originally and what we can prove after the fact, we can absolutely determine and qualify that. That should be the case, and it's not the case. And I
Yeah,
think that's a massive problem.
yeah. Like I would like you and I've talked about this before about like we can both agree that elections need to be fair and free, and we ought to be able to see a paper trail
Mm-hmm.
or some kind of way to
Yeah.
feel comfortable about it. I should do a little digging and see like what do we do, what can we see? Because I think it varies widely by state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
would expect it varies widely by state.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah. I
are
mean,
there
because each
best
state
practices?
sets their own rules.
Yeah, yeah. So what is are there best practices that some states follow and some states don't?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
just found just found a
Yeah.
report, 26
Have you
page
seen
report.
this? Have you seen this article that came out in some years ago?
No, I don't think so.
Secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election. 35-minute read. I actually didn't read it. It came out in February 2021. The way that heard this reported, and again, I didn't read it, was basically that like um this piece here. That's why the participant want the secret history of the 2020 election told, even though it sounds like a paranoid fever dream. A well-funded cabal of powerful people ranging across industries and ideologies working together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information. They were not rigging the election; they were fortifying it. And like the way this has been presented to me is that they're basically bragging about rigging the election. They call it fortifying, but what they're actually doing is rigging the
Hmm.
election. They're proud of it, and then now they show us exactly what they did. You know,
Can you send me that
Um,
link? I want to read that.
yeah, yeah,
I'll
yeah.
probably have it.
I kind of want to read it too. I never did. Um,
Yeah. And I
and
want to read this too, which is like looks way more boring. Yeah, thank you. But this one is like election audits across the United States. Like,
right.
what are we actually doing? Like risk limit. I'm fascinated. I mean, I'm sure this
Yeah.
is boring as all heck, but like the details are going to be boring, right? Like the details of how do we
Yeah,
have
yeah.
free and fair elections are going to be boring. So,
Well,
yeah.
yes. And so, okay, so you mentioned before with Trump admitting that he lost the election. I would argue with that because I genuinely believe that he genuinely believes that had there not been cheating, he would have won easily
Hmm.
because the margins weren't that big. Um, and I think you could hear what he's saying as meaning, yeah, he lost the election in the sense that he's not a president. He didn't lose it in the sense that it was a legitimate election.
Hmm.
Um, and by the same token, there's a clip where Joe Biden says that they stole the election. Like, whereas
Remember you
like,
showed that. Yeah.
is that a Freudian slip or what is it? Or is that just like, a gaffe?
Right.
We obviously
Right.
can't make, final judgments based on that, but it's like, yeah. Um, and then, oh yeah, have you seen the graph of the election? Have you heard the stories of these counties that stopped counting at like 11, 12 p.m. or something, and then they said, "Hey, we're done for the night," and send all the poll watchers home, and then they came back at 3 a.m. and started counting again? Have you seen those stories? There's
Not
another
recently, at
county
least. Yeah.
there's another county where they were like, oh, there were some leaks and plumbing, whatever. And then they sent everybody home and then they came back in and it turned out there wasn't a leak and they kept counting, but now without the poll watchers. There's been documented cases of running the same exact ballots multiple times, which they can see because of the scans and like specific identifying markers on them. Have you seen the graph of like, it's like Trump, Biden, and then like Biden is behind, and then there's like a sudden jump, and then Biden wins.
I don't think I have.
No,
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it'll be interesting.
but it's yeah. So it's like the broader point I wanted to make is like rather than like if there are credible um, concerns about the integrity of the election, it seems to me that it's the government's job to prove that it did it right. It's not up to Trump to sue and make sure he has all his ducks in a like that's a government priority to make sure that our elections are unfuckwithable and to just share all the data, all the information, crowdsource, let everybody fucking look into it and make an
Right.
assessment and find if there are flaws, let's find them, right? Just like you
Right.
hire if you do software, you hire people to try to
Right.
break into your systems to make sure they're secure.
Right.
Um, yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. I don't know enough about how all that works. Like one of the things that's come home to me is realizing that I don't know enough about the details of how all that
Mm-hmm.
works. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Did I
This
tell you I
is
volunteered to be a poll worker for my like local poll thing?
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, they don't
For
need
this
me
election
for
or
this
what?
election. Yeah, they don't need me, but maybe next time.
Okay. All right. This is the graph I was talking about. This is the actual graph. So what was that here? Oh, wait. Sorry, I'm not sharing. Here we go. The state of the race in Wisconsin, total presidential votes with 89%. And then like this like interesting jump that
And is it
happens all of a
explained
sudden.
anywhere? Like, because I mean, I remember part of what I remember hearing about this was that that different votes get counted at different times, like the mail-in ballots, the early votes, like those things get counted at different times, and so some jumps are expected because
Right.
different groups of people voted in different ways, tend to vote more in different ways, and I don't
Yeah, yeah.
remember the details,
Well,
but
and
it's
this one is
yeah.
saying this is the 538 chart. It's a play on. So
Mm-hmm.
like this one is saying, hey, that's a scam. But I mean, this one is definitely an image that I've seen a lot as like quote unquote evidence of fraud, right? And
Interesting.
and I guess what this guy is saying is that that's not true. And again,
Right.
like that's exactly
Right.
um um that's exactly the kind of thing um that like we need to be able to get to the bottom of and get honest opinions about. And I think or get honest research on. And I think,
Right.
I mean, the pattern that I've seen again and again is like, you know, I'm not seeing a clear desire for truth. Right?
Mm.
In when it comes to the election or JFK assassination or like these things, I don't see a credible, sincere attempt to uncover the truth and be forthcoming with information and data, and
Interesting.
that's a
Yeah.
problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good place to leave it for today.
I think so. I think so.
That we both believe that we need more and better data and
We
transparency
fucking
around
do.
data and
Yeah.
shared sources, a single source of shared source of truth. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Beth,
Yeah.
really, really appreciate you being willing to do this with me.
No, it's
And I know
interesting.
it's yeah. Um well, it's not for the faint of heart. It takes a special level of courage and sincerity to be willing to do
Yeah.
this. So I
Well,
really
thank you.
appreciate
You
that.
too. I mean, I think, showing up and for any of us showing up and saying, hey, this is what I've heard, this is what I believe, like it can be fraught.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. It's been a fun.
Cool. All right. Love it. Thank you
All
so much.
right.
Let's do it again soon.
Let's do it again. All right. Sounds good.
All right.
Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.